Welcome to the deep dive. We dig into the sources, try to pull out the clearest picture for you. Today, we're taking a journey into Zambia. Its history is, well, it's as rich and complex as its landscape. Yeah, our mission here is to really unpack how Zambia evolved. From those ancient roots, which are often based on oral tradition, kind of fragmentary, right through the colonial period, the fight for independence, and then its path as its own nation. We've got a detailed account guiding us, and honestly, there are some facts in here that might surprise you.
Oh, it's a really compelling story. Zambia isn't just, another country on the map. It's a living example of resilience, I think. You see how its pre-colonial history sort of shaped its response later on during the colonial times, and how those patterns still influence things today. And its position right in the middle of southern Africa makes its story really important for understanding the whole region.
Okay, let's dive right in, way back. Our sources say the earliest folks we know about in what's now Zambia were the Khoisan and Nilotic peoples. Hunter-gatherers, right. What was their life like?
Yeah, small groups, very mobile, really adapted to the land. They used the resources around them.
Yeah.
But things changed dramatically, maybe 1,500 years ago. That's when Bantu-speaking peoples started arriving from the southeast and central Africa. And this wasn't just more people showing up, it was a total shift. They brought agriculture, iron technology.
Big changes.
Huge. It meant permanent settlements could take root maybe about 1,000 years ago. And that allowed for, well, more complex societies. Kingdoms formed, fragmented, grouped together under chiefs.
Right. Sounds dynamic. And then our sources really point to this moment, the Ngoni invasion from the south, 1820s. How did that shake things up?
Oh, massively. The Ngoni were a serious military force. They set up a strong, very centralized kingdom. And yeah, their arrival was pretty devastating for many of the local groups.
Scattered them.
Yeah, often scattered them. But what's really interesting is the Lozi people. Because they controlled those floodplain areas, they actually managed to hold off the Ngoni initially.
Ah, the geography gave them an edge.
Exactly. A temporary one, though. In the end, the Ngoni's, let's say, stronger organization and hierarchy won out. The Lozis were conquered, had to pay tribute to the Ngoni kingdom, which was based near modern Chapata.
Wow. Shows how power dynamics can shift.
Definitely. Even strong initial resistance can be overcome by a more dominant force.
But the Lozi story doesn't end there, right? The sources say by the end of the 19th century, Chief Lewanika leads them to defeat the Ngoni. How did that happen? And what about the British?
Right, so Lewanika and the Lozi did manage to regain their autonomy. But their comeback happened just as another big player arrived at British colonial power. The Ngoni were already facing pressures, internal and external, and yeah, the British forces ultimately broke their power around the end of the 1890s. It's this complex mix of local politics and outside colonial forces.
A tangled web.
And speaking of those earlier times, statehood starting way back in the first millennium AD, that was really driven by things like metal tools, trade. These new goods weren't just economic, they fueled rivalry, prestige, helped cement the power of those emerging rulers.
So, while these African kingdoms were dealing with their own complex situations, the wider world was changing, bringing new forces right to their doorstep, which leads us neatly into the colonial era. What were those first European contacts like? Our sources mention the Portuguese way back in the 1600s, but not much came of it.
No, not really sustained contact. The Portuguese came, explored a bit, but didn't stick around. It was actually the Arab merchants in the early 1800s who made a much bigger and frankly devastating impact. They established a significant slave trade, which really tore through communities and economies.
And that's where David Livingstone enters the picture. His journey in 1851 seems key.
Absolutely pivotal. Livingstone's travels, they really changed how the West saw this region. He made Victoria Falls famous, of course, but more than that.
Yeah.
He strongly advocated for British trading stations. He saw them as a way to fight the Arab slave trade. His reports, his narrative, definitely fueled British interest.
Right. That advocacy plus the potential resources. You mentioned copper earlier. So British interest ramps up in the 1880s. Traders, miners.
Exactly. And by 1889, part of what becomes Northern Rhodesia is declared a British protectorate.
And then comes the British South Africa Company, the BSC, Cecil Rhodes.
Yes, the BSC. In 1890, they get a royal charter. Think about it, a private company given basically governmental powers to administer and exploit this huge territory north of the Zambezi.
Wow. A company running a country, essentially.
Pretty much. The BSAC administered it until 1911. Then it shifted to more direct control under the British High Commissioner, but still very much colonial rule.
So this colonial setup gets cemented. What did that mean for the people living there? Our sources paint a really stark picture. 1930, 90% of the land confiscated.
It's staggering, isn't it?
Right.
90%. And by 1931, European settlers controlled most of the best farming land.
That must have completely upended lives. How did it affect African farming?
It was devastating. It forced African farmers off their traditional lands, pushed them into what they called the landless labor system, meaning they basically became a pool of cheap labor for the European mines and farms, stripped of their own economic independence.
It wasn't just land then.
Oh, no. Social control, too. They brought in the pass system, to control where people could go, especially African men moving to towns, limited their movement, their opportunities.
Yeah.
And women were specifically barred from working in the mines. It's interesting, these policies were actually based on models used in Ireland and Scotland. Shows a kind of imperial template.
A system of control. Okay, fast forward a bit.
That's right.
Mid-20th century, we start seeing political aspirations rise up against this system. The Federation of Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, and Nyasaland formed in 1953. Seems like a big step, but the sources say it was immediately challenged. Why?
Well, the Federation was supposed to be about economic cooperation, but for many Africans, it looked like a way to just lock in white minority rule across the region. So it was challenged right away based on, tribal feelings, but also fundamentally on race. It wasn't seen as a path to self-government.
So discontent was brewing.
Definitely. And that discontent fueled a major push for full self-government by the end of the 50s. It started really in Nyasaland, then gained huge momentum in northern Rhodesia.
And that pressure worked. The Federation dissolved in December 63, and Northern Rhodesia got a new form of self-government in January 64. How did the nationalist movements make that happen?
It was really the rise of powerful nationalist groups. The Northern Rhodesia African National Congress, NRINC, started back in 1948, later just called the ANC. They really tapped into all that frustration over taxes, land restrictions, mobilized people who were just fed up.
And then UNIP emerged, the United National Independence Party, splitting off from the ANC, and leading UNIP was Kenneth Kaunda. What made him such an effective leader?
Kaunda he was incredibly charismatic, a powerful speaker, very bold. He managed to connect with people across different tribal groups. He really became the voice, the symbol of the independence movement.
And this wasn't just talk, right? There was action.
Oh, yeah. The agitation just grew and grew, strikes in the 40s and 50s. Then in January 1959, widespread rioting basically shut down the economy.
Wow.
Yeah, and that led to leaders like Kaunda being detained. But it showed the strength of the movement. These weren't just minor protests. They were challenging the whole colonial system.
So after all that struggle, all that resistance, where did it lead?
It all came together. Zambia achieved full independence on October 23, 1964. And Kenneth Kaunda, that charismatic leader, became his first president. The end of a really long, hard fight.
So welcome to independent Zambia, October 24, 1964. It becomes the Republic of Zambia, landlocked about 56 African tribes. What were Kaunda's first moves as president?
Well, one of his big early policies was something called Zambian humanism, kicked off in 1967. It was an attempt to forge a unique national path, aimed at getting rid of racism, exploitation, and really promoting Africanization, getting Zambians in control of their own economy and government.
Okay, and economically, things were interesting. The sources talk about this huge boom early on, 1970s oil crisis. Copper prices went through the roof.
Yeah, there was a massive windfall during Kaunda's early years. Lots of money coming in from copper. But it didn't last.
What happened?
Copper prices collapsed.
Yeah.
And because the economy was so reliant on it, Zambia went into a massive slump. Like 25 years of economic decline followed.
That's rough. How did that economic pressure affect politics?
It had a huge impact. Amidst all that economic stress, there was a major political shift.
Yeah.
July 1st, 1972, Kaunda issues a decree. All other political parties banned. National Assembly dissolved.
Wow.
Yeah. Zambia declared a one-party state with Kaunda as life president. This got formalized in a new constitution in 1973. The idea, ostensibly, was stability, unity during tough times, but it meant a huge concentration of power.
Yet that wasn't the end of the story politically. By the early 90s, things shifted again, back towards multi-party democracy. The 1991 election, Kaunda and UNIP lost to the MMD. What drove that change?
I think it shows that desire for democratic choice, for accountability, never really went away. People wanted change. But even with multi-party democracy back, the 90s were tough. Governance issues, corruption, it was a struggle. President Wanawasa tried to tackle corruption in the 2000s, had some success.
But not entirely smooth sailing.
No, there was some backsliding later in the early 2010s. It highlights that ongoing challenge for so many post-colonial nations. building strong, clean institutions after decades of centralized rule and economic ups and downs.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Away from politics towards the cultural heart of Zambia. The sources mention this incredible diversity, like 42 distinct music styles. That's amazing. Not just music for fun, right?
Not at all. It's like a living archive. These 42 styles represent the different ethnic groups, and they carry history, traditions, stories. Everything from sacred ceremonies to, everyday life.
Give us an example. How does a specific style tell a story?
Well, you might have songs that recount ancient migrations, or songs tied specifically to planting maize, expressing hope for rain and a good harvest. But they can also be really personal songs about family problems, love, loss, even social commentary, sometimes quite pointed. Music is just woven into the fabric of life.
And that expressiveness extends to crafts, too. Wooden carvings, batiks, pottery.
Definitely. These aren't just objects. A carving might tell a folktale visually. The patterns on a batik could signify a particular clan or belief. Making these things, using them, passing them on, reinforces culture, identity. They're like tangible stories.
Which brings us to language. So many groups, 72 tribes, 22 languages, the sources say. No single dominant one. 7 national languages, all Bantu family. How do you manage that diversity?
It's a real challenge. Back in colonial times, missionaries actually used local languages first, which gave them some status. But later, English became the language of power, education, high prestige.
So what happened after independence?
The decision was made to make English the only official language for government, for schools. The idea was national unity, avoid picking one local language over others and causing tension.
Makes sense from one perspective.
Yeah, but now people are questioning that. Does relying only on English disadvantage kids whose first language isn't English? Does it marginalize indigenous languages? It's a tough balance.
A real dilemma. And quickly, traditional practices, matrilineal tribes are common. Ancestry through the mother's side.
Yes, quite prevalent. That shapes family structures, inheritance, social roles differently than patrilineal systems. The mother's line holds significant importance.
Has that changed much over time?
Like all traditions, it adapts. Modern life, legal changes, especially around things like property, succession practices have evolved, but the core matrilineal identity often remains strong. It's an ongoing blend of tradition and change.
Okay, let's zoom out. Zambia's place in the world. Landlocked, right in southern Africa. Borders with loads of countries: Angola, DRC, Tanzania, Malawi, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia. That must shape things.
Absolutely. Being landlocked makes regional relationships and trade routes incredibly important. Physically, it's mostly a high plateau, around 1,200 meters on average. But you also get low valleys like the Luanga, mountain ranges like the Machinga, big rivers, the Zambezi forming the southern border, plus the Kafu, Luangwa, lots of savanna.
And the climate varies quite a bit.
Yeah, quite a lot. Wetter up north near the Congo Basin, much drier down in the southwest Kalahari lowlands. This variety means lots of different potential for agriculture, different natural resources.
How did that geography plus the post-independence economic situation, losing copper revenue, relying on South Africa, affect its foreign policy? The sources mentioned turning inward, closing borders.
That was a really significant move. Closing borders with South Africa and Rhodesia wasn't just economic, though the struggling economy was a big factor and the government faced criticism. It was also deeply political. A statement against apartheid in South Africa, against white minority rule in Rhodesia, a move towards self-reliance, even if it was economically painful in the short term.
A difficult choice.
Very. But if you look at the bigger picture, Zambia sits in this incredibly central strategic spot. It has these amazing fertile areas like the Barassi Basin, the Kafu Flats, rich soil, loads of natural resources. And what's striking, is the sources point out, is how much of that potential is still largely untapped. Huge possibilities for the future there.
And that really brings our deep dive on Zambia toward a close. We've traced quite a path from those early kingdoms through the huge changes of colonialism, the fight for independence, and the ongoing journey since then. It's a story of navigating tradition and change.
It really is. Zambia's story, the ups and downs economically, the incredible cultural mix, the constant effort towards stability and growth, it really does give you a powerful way to understand the wider story of post-colonial nations in Africa and elsewhere too. It shows the resilience, the complexity of building a nation.
So thinking about that resilience, that constant evolution, here's something for you to consider.
Yeah.
What lessons do you think Zambia's journey offers for other nations trying to find that balance between holding on to their historical identity and meeting the demands of today's interconnected world?